I'm Amy at EuroLuxHome.com. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. If you enjoy learning about European antiques, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who might also enjoy learning about European antiques. So welcome back to our series about how to tell if a piece of furniture is truly an authentic antique, or how to date or guess the age. Now, I will say that it really is an art and science that's based on experience. I've been an antique dealer for the past 20 years, and when I judge age, I combine observation with research, knowledge of the historical styles of antiques, knowledge of construction materials, construction techniques, and also materials. And you put all of those clues together, you really become sort of a furniture detective or a sleuth. And it's not one thing in particular, it's a combination of all of the clues that you bring together to come up with your estimated age. Now, I will encourage you that you might want to check with an expert just to check yourself as you're learning. So our series started with episode number 1, where we identified the style of the piece, and that's your starting point for age. Next, episode 2, we looked at the materials that you might find. Episode 3, we looked a little deeper into how those materials age. We looked for patina and signs of wear. Episode 4, we looked specifically at wood separation or shrinkage, or how we can see signs of age in wood. And now, today, episode number 5, we're looking specifically at construction techniques. So we're looking for clues about how something was actually built and to see if we might even be able to determine the tools that were used. When we're looking specifically at antiques versus something that's not an antique, we're really looking for the handmade aspects. And when something is handmade, you expect to see asymmetry to it. You expect imperfections. When man makes something, it's not perfect. Versus when something is machine-made, we should see it being very uniform and perfect. So that's really your first starting place, is looking for those irregularities and signs of something being handmade versus machine-made. So this is episode 5, and we have 5 things that we're going to look at and talk about today as far as construction techniques. So the first is joinery, how something comes together, and we will look specifically at dovetail joints. So, what is a dovetail joint? It is where interlocking pins and tails come together to create a carved wood joint. It's mostly used to build boxes, and you specifically see it in drawers. So I will just point out, it's often here where the drawer comes together. Now, this is a very old piece. This is early 18th century. So for one, the drawer is quite heavy, and it's the tails and the pins. These two things are coming together. And this, because it's so old, I would expect it to be very large and hand-shaped. So it's actually, this drawer is really heavy. It's actually just one big dovetail. And they're called dovetails because it kind of looks like a dove's tail going into that section. So we just have one big handcrafted dovetail. So it might be a little easier then if I move into something that is more late 19th century. So here you can see that these are the pins and the tails, and there's our little dovetails. And they are a little more irregular. You can tell that they're carved by hand because they're different. This side has 4, and this side only has 2. And if I look at the side with the 4, you can see they're irregular. They're not all the same shape. And As we moved from that single, just great big fat dovetail joints from the early pieces, now we're moving in late 18th century into the 19th century. The dovetails become finer and more precisely cut. Now, then what I would look for is, if I'm trying to date something, here is a machined piece. This piece dates from the 1950s, and you can see that it's very uniform. So that was done by machine. All of the tails are exactly the same. The spacing is exactly the same. I can tell that it's not been carved by hand at all. So that's part of how then I see the age. If I'm looking for specific shapes of the dovetails. The form and the craftsmanship of the dovetails themselves tell me the age. So we're going to move on to our second point, which is nails and screws. So let's go around to the back side of this piece, and this is a really nice old one, dates late 18th century. So we'll be able to see some of these signs that we're looking for. So come on. All right, so what we're looking for are nails and screws versus staples. Now, if you find staples, that's going to be a newer construction technique. But originally, we're looking for hand-forged nails that were used up until the early 19th century. And hand-forged nails, so each nail was made by hand in order to make the piece of furniture. So behind me, you can see right here is actually a square head. They're rather irregular in shape. If I were to pull this out, it would have an irregular shape. It would have a rectangular shank, and the head is square rather than what we think of today as round nails. So that would be early pieces up until about the early 19th century. Once we move into the 19th century, we begin to have cut nails. They still have rectangular shanks, but they're a little more regular. And we'll put up a picture for you to see that. By the late 19th century, we've developed round wire nails, which is really what's used today. So that can help you tell age by looking at the size and the shape of the nails. Now, there's also screws. So hand-forged flathead screws were used from the late 15th century all the way up to the early 18th century. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. The shape is irregular. Where you would put that flathead screwdriver is irregular because it's all made by hand. So you wouldn't expect them all to look identical. You would expect irregularities. Once you move into the mid to late 19th century, we'll find machined flathead screws. So still flathead screws, but they'll be the same size. All of the screws will be the same size. And where you would put the screwdriver in will also be the same size consistently on all of the screws. Then you may also have heard of a Phillips head screw. The Phillips head design, which kind of looks like a star, that was invented in the 1930s, once the Industrial Revolution was really in progress, and Phillips head screws make the the assembly process in assembly lines and automated processes easier. So the Phillips head was designed for ease in production. So that will help us identify that something is 1930s or later. Now do keep in mind, sometimes an antique piece, somebody may have put in a screw somewhere where something was loose and it was a Phillips head. So just because you find a Phillips head doesn't mean that piece is 1930s or later, but if the entire piece is made with Phillips head, that would give you a clue. All right, so number 3 is our mortise and tenon construction. So what is mortise and tenon? It's one of the oldest and most fundamental woodworking methods known for its strength and stability. So it's a way of joining wood at right angles without nails or screws. So It's often found in chair joints, in bed joints, and table joints. We do have a great example here of a mortise and tenon construction that I'll point out in a moment, but first I'll explain that the mortise is actually the hole or the recessed area. It's normally the vertical element. And then the tenon is the projection that's going into the hole, and that's the horizontal element. So when you bring those together, then you form a very strong joint. So over here on the side, we have what's called wooden pegged construction, wooden pegged mortise and tenon construction. So this member is being joined to this member right here with these square pegs. You can see more here on the back side. You can see these wooden pegs really all over the piece. So that's what's holding this piece together without screws or nails. It creates a very solid interlocking joint. And this method of mortise and tenon has been around since 2000 BCE. Really long time they've been making furniture with mortise and tenon joints. And it was the favored technique, construction technique, up until the mid-19th century. And then with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, that's when we switched to nails and screws as the favored method, although you will still find dovetail joints. Now, that brings us up through three things. Our fourth thing where we can look at construction techniques would be the saw marks. So what we're looking, you want to look at the back side of the piece, maybe the underside of the tabletop, the bottom of the drawer, and what we're looking for is hand-planed or straight saw marks. So this piece was hand-planed, and you can really see these big straight saw marks. Versus something post-1830, we would see circular saw marks. And what that looks like is a slightly curved or an arc-like pattern running perpendicular to the wood grain. So that's a way for us to look at the construction technique, look at the tools that were used in order to help figure out the age. Now, our fifth element that we're looking at is if something is upholstered, you would want to check and see what is under the upholstery. Are there hand-tied springs? Is there maybe horsehair padding? Those would let you know that something is much older. Now, do keep in mind, antique chairs are often reupholstered over their life, and so it may have newer padding or newer fabric, even though it's an antique frame. So the key to determining age or whether or not something is an authentic antique is really to do your research, to take your time, make lots of notes, and then go out and handle a lot of different antiques. Go to antique stores, go to antique markets, ask lots of questions. That's how you'll really learn, is by asking questions, really putting your hands onto things. Do your reading, go to the library, read antique collector forums, and have fun, because it really is a learning process that through experience you too will be able to date your piece and determine whether or not it is a true authentic antique. Be sure to come back next week for our last episode of this series. Remember that EuroLux Antiques would love for you to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who might also enjoy learning about how to tell if a piece is truly an antique. See you next time!